And I'm absolutely delighted and actually more than a bit excited to have a very good friend with us who is called Scapigliata. And we've just had a very odd conversation about the fact that Scottish people cannot really say things. So she's chosen the very most complicated name for me to be able to pronounce. So welcome. I'm really stoked that you agreed to do this. And I just want to tell you that way back when I first joined Twitter, which was possibly, I don't know, maybe 2017 or something like that, I had this more academic and healthcare related account before I did this sort of schools thing. You were one of my most joyful and important finds, I have to tell you. So, you know, the combination of your brains, your bravery, your tenacity and your kind of hardcore feminist analysis, radical feminist analysis. I found you really, really inspiring, Scap. So, you know, you are obviously best known for being a doctor, a psychiatrist, but more than that, you are a brilliant friend to many, many people on Twitter. And you're very amusing. You are a writer, you're also a photographer, and you are a massive, massive dog lover. And for that, I love you even more. And hopefully my sound won't be contaminated by my dog who's beside us. So welcome. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me. Hi. What an introduction. Thank you.
Well, you know, it could have been worse. I could have got your name completely and utterly, you know, wrong. So look, everyone knows you by this image, this famous image that you go by, and by your name, because so many people would love to dox you and find out exactly who you are, because you know you're very, very famous. So tell us a bit about yourself and what you're up to.
I'm just actually an ordinary doctor that had to retire due to an autoimmune condition and complications of. So whilst I was training to be a psychiatrist, I had to just leave medicine before I finished my specialist training. And I got quite sick, quite young, and was basically stuck in the house. And circa 2010, I started noticing, well, in the early 2000s, I started noticing glossy magazines talking about trans children. I think it started by saying gender neutral parenting and how amazing that was. And then it quickly escalated into, oh, my girl is really a boy. And because we are using gender neutral parenting, we are going to just not, you know, raise them as either. And then by 2010, 2011, I think the industry of actually socially and then tentatively medically transitioning children started in earnest. I still wasn't very well, but I was well enough to just start researching. I joined some feminist boards, started experiencing trans-identified males screaming at women, turf, things like that, even just by, you know, using female-centered language or just trying to discuss this topic. Soon after, I think the famous Caitlyn Jenner transition occurred and Rachel Dolezal scandal came, and we were all asking, so how is one okay and the other one isn't? And it's 2022, I still haven't received a decent response from trans activists about why is it okay to pretend to be, for men to pretend to be a woman, but it's not okay for white people to pretend to be Black. I mean, just to make it clear, I don't approve of either, obviously, it's just the hypocrisy. And then after that, I joined Twitter. I mean, I've had an old Twitter account that was doing nothing. I rejoined it and just started meeting women, figuring out what was going on, formulating my thoughts. And then it became apparent that it is a whole can of worms involving medical institutions, law, police, And yeah, this is how my essay started. And since then, I've been connecting with others in writing and have ended up with a lot of followers over the years. But it's really a joint effort because, you know, I learned a lot from others and others learn from me. So I think that's how we've all done it, the grassroots movement of women who have opposed all of this.
Yeah, we're absolutely learning on the hoof. And I mean, I remember when I first turned up, you know, my opinions and ideas have definitely moved a long way since that point. And you've definitely been part of that process in the learning journey. So you've been writing a book basically, and not just one book. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, over the years, loads and loads of colleagues from healthcare fields reached out to me, having read something that I've written, and they kept asking, can I please put all my essays into like a PDF format or a book or something? And then early last year, I just thought, okay, fine, if I'm doing it, I might as well do it properly. And I reworked the essays, wrote a few new ones, referenced everything. And now that book of essays will be coming out, I'm hoping in the next month, because I'm self-publishing it on Amazon. And then that will be my contribution, my formal contribution. You know, obviously I'm not bigging myself up as any kind of particular expert in anything. I'm just the basic doctor analyzing all of this from basic principles. But I think an ideology and practices that fail on basic principles, that they will not stand any kind of robust specialist analysis. But anyway, I've combined medical and feminist perspectives in analyzing what I think is the biggest medical and social scandal in recent history. And hopefully it's also reasonably readable for readers of different backgrounds. So I tried not to use too much jargon and tried to explain, whilst at the same time I tried to tackle some very complex concepts, because gender ideology is, whilst on the surface it appears quite ridiculous, with, you know, obviously false claims like trans women are women and what have you. If you dig deeper, there is some very, very interesting, convoluted and clever conflation of various different concepts that have given the foundation to those ultimate claims. So to actually debunk it all and explain it all, it wasn't easy, but I hope readers will enjoy it.
I'm absolutely certain that they will. I mean, it's certainly something that we've talked quite a lot about, and it's difficult. One of the things that I find as well is it is difficult appealing to a kind of the complexity of the audiences, because obviously this fight that we're in has drawn in so many people from so many different backgrounds, which has been fantastic, and it has been one of the best parts of the journey, because let's face it, there's been many horrific parts of this journey in terms of the daily struggle that we find in the work that we're doing together. But actually trying to communicate the issues to all of these different people. For me, obviously, I've got a lot of parents who are completely fresh to the gender wars. And then there are also professionals. And then there's also the work that we're doing with healthcare professionals and colleagues. Maybe I can draw you into some thoughts and conversation on that, if it's okay, because I know it's something that we've spoken about quite a lot together as you know, fellow healthcare professionals. You know, coming from, you know, obviously, you know that I was a principal lecturer and I was a course leader and taught nursing across the UK. So I have quite a lot of opinions on the issue, you know, of education and the institutional capture, which I know is something which you're incredibly concerned about as a doctor. You know, we're at a point where we've got this, you know, we've got universities, professional bodies, and we got this massive silence from academics, from clinicians, from the regulating bodies, leaders, and you know, we've got this, certainly in my area, you know, in terms of nursing, we've got this this bubble, these bubbles that have risen to the top of the profession, which are basically young, very underqualified egos, which seem to now be working with all of these lobby groups and setting the agenda and embedding all of these gender captured ideas. And everyone's now too scared to stand up to all of these political activist ideologies. I mean, what's your kind of thoughts on that in terms of the professions or medicine generally?
Well, I would like to pick up on something you said that just made me realize something. I think in terms of communication, one of the biggest, most important skills that doctors need, and I'm sure the same is true for nurses, is to be able to tailor the explanation to the patient or the person who is listening. And even the most convoluted and complex concepts, one can learn to explain in a very basic language that would even a person, for example, with learning disabilities or a child will understand, maybe not in exactly the same detail, but will actually understand the concept in a way that is realistic, relevant, and that makes them understand what's happening to them. So the young people who are now leading this, I think it's deliberate. Denton's report, which was first uncovered by, I think, James Kirkup in Spectator, at least that's the first time I saw it, outlines it beautifully. And one of the main strategies is to co-opt young, politically ambitious people to convince older people, either within political parties or within whatever establishment, politicians will be convinced that the young people of today are going to be senior politicians of tomorrow, and that history will belong to them, and that somehow they will have right instincts about what is right when modern concepts, novel concepts are concerned. And I think it feeds back to the point about explaining complex concepts. The complex concepts by which they manage to arrive to, say, a mantra that trans women are women are not being properly explained. There is deliberate obfuscation going on, and young people typically don't have the experience, or if they've also been indoctrinated at universities, which is really happening a lot in most fields, they would have just, for a variety of reasons, including personalities, personal ambitions, things like that, will just accept things on face value. They will not necessarily have the confidence or experience to challenge, and then there will be willing acolytes who will then go on and promulgate it. And I think what's happening is that no one on a more senior level actually understand what the hell is going on, because these things are not explained to them properly. They're just told, this is how it is, everyone else agrees, people who are much more expert in this than you have worked it all out, don't worry your pretty little head about it, just accept it, this is the right thing to do. And I think there's been a breakdown in the common sense first principle of needing to explain concepts very clearly. That's not happening, and we are just seeing this superficial assertion, which has worked quite well, because I think it is a niche field. It also has been forced-steamed with lesbian, gay and bisexual activism, and society has a lot of guilt and a lot of concern about ill treatment of these people in the past. People are very concerned about being told they're homophobic. Furthermore, a lot of children who are transitioning are actually homosexual or bisexual. So accusation of homophobia can always be raised, and transphobia is just, attacked onto it, again, without much explanation. So I think most people will just say, okay, fine, I'm not touching this can of worms. And people who do try are made an example of, and that's how you ended up with this culture of silencing and whatnot.
It's a shield, isn't it? They can hide beneath it. I mean, I'm so livid, at the senior, more experienced colleagues, who've been in the trade for a long time, why they aren't just being, you know, where's their moral compass gone? You know, we were truth tellers, you know, people, you know, we came into these professions because, you know, we were good at telling the truth, dealing with the difficult issues, delivering the bad news, dealing with, you know, difficult concepts. And now we've almost just handed it all over. You know, the fact that we've got this situation where we've got, like, for instance, with the GLAD situation, where we've got 3/4 of these medical schools signing up to this most ridiculous charter, and you know, the level of capture. I mean, what I just can't, I actually can't fathom it, and why they aren't all jumping up and down, you know, where these senior people have gone. And I'll just give you a bit of a kind of personal slant on this. One of the things, you know, my professional background was obviously in HIV and sexual health, which I've talked about. And a lot of this gender medicine is hiding under the umbrella of sexual health clinics, certainly in the community setting. And I've looked at, and public health, obviously, because of public health and epidemiology and the commissioning of gender medicine. And I've looked at some of the people who are actually working as consultants in these arenas. And they're people who I worked with in the AIDS period, you know, when it was when they were cutting their teeth as junior doctors, and you know, people were dying, and it was a very, very awful, difficult time. And I know them personally, and I know for a fact that not one of them would accept that, you know, they were all gay men. I know for a fact that not one of them would believe that that they would be sexually attracted to a female body and accept that as a male person. And yet they are commissioning and running these services, and turning out a lot of this absolute, you know, honestly, Scap, I just don't know what to do with myself when I look at what they're doing.
It's difficult to know. I mean, I think lesbians will probably have the most accurate assessment of why gay men in particular have been co-opted to champion this, because they've experienced sex inequality within LGBT activism for a very long time. I think men of whatever sexual orientation have all the same issues of being sexist, not really seeing women as equals, and not really caring about what they think unless women agree with them and are happy to enable them. That's just been true across the board. I think gay men, further than that, have less incentive to associate with women, because, you know, the sexual association is not there, like, you know, straight men, for example. And perhaps, I mean, I don't know, but this is just a guess and a speculation, perhaps they get to be even more isolated into male-only circles. And I think, for example, something that struck me following these various trials, for example, Alison Bailey's trial, you see when the people are pulled out of their little echo chambers and asked to, in court, to actually explain themselves and their opinions, how even they don't really know why they believe this, why they support this, why these assertions are true. But when you're in an echo chamber, it's one of those things where, you know, people can start finishing each other's sentences when they think they all agree on everything. And a lot of things that are not true or not quite well worked out can just fly under the radar. And if you're not challenged in that context, you can just, you know, feel that, start instinctively feeling that this is all true and right and noble and what have you. Another factor, I think, is that gay men have suffered a lot through the history. And the gay crisis was extremely traumatic for that whole group, I'm sure. And I think force-steaming trans ideology with LGBT activism gave LGBT activism a lot more influence, a lot more money, a lot more prominence, and perhaps that power and renewed social currency was just too attractive to some. I'm sure that not all, I know for a fact that not all gay men support it. And I think this ideology is generally supported enthusiastically by people who are in some way profiting from endorsing it, either financially or socially or career-wise. So I think it's kind of one of those funnel effects where you ended up with gay men championing it more than anyone else. But perhaps it was deliberate because the trans activism was forced-steamed with LGB activism. But either way, I just find them, sorry, whenever I try to speak with them, I just find them so stone cold to women, so dehumanizing to me as a person. There is just nothing. There is no empathy, no emotion, no willingness to engage. There is just, it's quite something trying to have any kind of dialogue with them, I find.
It's a really difficult subject, but we need them to engage. We need them to talk more. We need this to be aired much more because it is the root. I mean, it's a bit like I know one of the things which is very close to your heart is sexism and homophobia in medicine generally, and you know, that's a kind of broader conversation which we could touch on, but we need all of this to be aired. We can't let it carry on being, you know, hanging in the dark shadows and being the elephant in the room, because we're not going to be able to move forward, because what's going to happen as we move into the next level of these new disaggregated gender services, unless this is all kind of, you know, brought out of the woodwork, the same thing is going to happen. And I do have a lot of concerns, which we can maybe talk about the new gender setup. But I mean, in terms of, you know, there was a report that came out about they talked about barriers to getting more doctors into practice, and I know that I certainly thought, well, you know, some of those are probably down to these pressures.
Yeah, I think, you know, medicine is generally in a terrible shape in the UK because of chronic underfunding and chronic antagonism of the government towards healthcare workers who have been sounding the alarm about health services just no longer being fit for purpose, because the ratios of staff to patients are very poor, the waiting lists are massive, the, you know, various equipment is not really available or functioning, etc. So I think, you know, being this, you know, as you know, working in medicine is quite traumatic. You are there for hundreds of devastating stories every week, you know, something that other people might read in a book and cry about it. You just go from one patient to the next and you're there for them. You do the best you can for them. You go home. It's a hard job. And to then, in addition, be disrespected, in addition to then have to resort to food banks to feed your children, you know, I'm not surprised. You know, it was always an altruistic profession mostly, but there are limits to altruism, and I'm not quite sure that, you know, the Conservative government understands that. But, you know, I have literally zero influence on them. Being a socialist at heart for my whole life, I just don't really quite understand how all this can just keep carrying on. But I think another aspect of barriers now is, like you said, it's similar to the police, not quite as bad, but, you know, there is institutional racism, institutional sexism, institutional homophobia that is always results with white, heterosexual, middle class or upper middle class men on top, and everyone else may or may not be, you know, admitted to the corridors of power at their discretion. And I think EDI departments uniquely open the doors to the usually discriminated demographics. Like you will usually see people from ethnic minorities, people from minority sexual orientations, etc. And EDI departments have been given a lot of power. So in a way, it's been ring fenced where that's where they can, you know, exert their power. That's one place where they can, where women or lesbians or you know, Black people can have some influence. But the whole thing is not right, because I don't think that our institution of medicine as a whole has actually faced up to its internal issues. And I think those issues will plague them going forwards, both with procuring staff, as well as dealing with this scandal, as well as trying to do right by the children who are being caught in this transgender social contagion, which is what you said about decentralized services. If it hasn't been recognized that this is extremely dangerous and damaging. And that's another thing with euphemisms and with minimizations and with not explaining, you know, there is a lot of language manipulation around it. A trans girl, trans boy, always associated with trueness and being authentic, and social transition and preferred pronouns, and hop onto puberty blockers, which are allegedly completely reversible, even though we, you know, any normal person who's gone through medical school will know that of course they aren't. You know, we've seen these drugs used for different purpose for a lot shorter time, and even then it was giving side effects. And then hop onto mastectomies, and oh my God, what are you people doing? But no, it's pressing a pause button, and top surgery and bottom surgery and gender affirming surgery, and people can distance themselves a lot more easily from the realities, and realities are so horrible that if you try to post a picture of some of the outcomes of these horrible surgeries, you will actually get banned on Twitter for it, because it's so traumatic. And now you're seeing detransitioners speaking out, and their stories are absolutely heartbreaking. Stories of mutilation, loss of function, phantom feelings of pain, arousal, things that cannot be addressed in any way, just people in shock. And this jives with what I've seen early on in my practice when I was doing psychiatry and receiving male patients post-gender reassignment surgery in acute states of distress, acutely suicidal, on one-to-one watch, pretty much indefinitely, just utterly distraught at the fact that no, this ultimate intervention did nothing for the way how they felt psychologically, and now they're permanently mutilated, and now they just want to die. And that terrifies me. That more than anything tells me that this is extremely dangerous. There is nothing kind, nothing ethical about what is being done to these people, children or adults. And if you remove euphemistic language, if you honestly have a look, you know, away from surgical, I'm God, egos, look how I can do this, look what I can do. Once you actually look at it, it has to be stopped, in my opinion. There is no one benefits from transition, young or old. That is a nasty psychiatric and surgical idea that needs to end. It's rooted in medical homophobia. It started by targeting gay men. It's now proliferated into, you know, very, you know, an intervention that is meant to deal with social ills such as pornography, sexual assault on women and girls and things like that. It's a catch-all that, no, don't worry, none of your traumas, none of your issues are going to carry on as long as we just change your sex, quote unquote, and everything will be lovely. And I think in overstretched services, everyone or most people in medicine like to hear that something is not their issue. You know, I think one of the biggest, you know, reliefs a doctor feels is that, oh, brilliant, there is a colleague who is more expert in this, who can deal with this patient. I don't have to deal with them, refer. Yeah, and I think that's just been a beautiful pipeline from CAMS on to Tavistock, from GP surgeries to Tavistock, etc. There are so many institutional problems. This is just the outcome, in my opinion.
There, I mean, there's so many thoughts that about what you said there. One of the dealing with the last one first. This, in terms of the future, one of the big things that I have about worries I have is that they have talked about this, you know, this holistic care proposition, where we've got this whole joined up thinking between, you know, psychiatry, surgery, endocrinology, speech and language, etc., etc. But the very foundation of the NHS is that it's not holistic. It's very disaggregated. No one works as a team in terms of you know, it's all completely, the communication is absolutely appalling. There's very, very few mechanisms in place where there are really great models where everyone's sitting down, apart from very few, perhaps in cases like maybe in psychiatry themselves. But once you then enter the territory of going more into including medicine and surgery, for instance, it's going to fall apart. And then when this goes out into the territories around the country, I have some real concerns that just from them as you know, as patients, that this is definitely not going to work. And the level of gaslighting that's going on from within those healthcare professionals, you know, the lying needs to stop. The language nonsense needs to stop, because as you say, the trauma that these patients now are going through, the amount of frank abuse, you know, we had this public health setup where we wanted to prevent illness, and then we had this acute setup where we wanted to treat illness, but then we've created this whole system in the middle where we basically are now an iatrogenic, you know, create illness system. Why? How have we got to a point?
It's because it's ideological. It's because the infiltration of healthcare is based on ideology. So ideologically, it is asserted that there is such a thing as gender identity, that becoming, quote unquote, that changing yourself, this extreme body modification will cure feelings of distress, and reverse that the feelings of distress are caused by this, and that there is such a thing as a trans person and a trans child, and that there is such a thing as having opposite sex brain in your body, and that is somehow not manageable by any other means than changing the body to appease the brain. You know, and anyone who has dealt in psychiatry knows that that's complete nonsense. You know, people with body dysmorphia think that, and their surgical interventions don't cure their distress. And there are many different reasons why mind might be distressed at the body, etc., etc. But ideologically, there is a strong ideological component that holds those tenets true. It's like religion. And once you have that in the center of it, that cannot be questioned, because, you know, someone said that, someone asserted that's the truth, and somehow everyone accepted that that's the truth. You're moving into a religion. You're not really dealing with science anymore. It's like a Mormon, you know, saying, God dictated this to me, or I wrote it down and now I lost it, but, you know, no one can see it, but I'm telling you that's true. And everyone goes, oh, okay. I think we are in that territory right now. So everything that is happening in this field has to be mindful of the ideology, of the truisms that this ideology brings in. Even though they're complete nonsense, they cannot be challenged. And of course, once you have that sort of situation, science is secondary, and you can see it everywhere. Most people who are challenged by evidence of harm will just reject it. They will not accept it because it can't possibly be true, because we know that this is the right thing to do. And you're going to struggle. It's almost like you need to deprogram people or somehow burst that bubble. But, you know, how do you convince people to stop believing? That's a very hard thing.
Well, I think that there has to be a lot of structural attack from the top down, because if you think about the amount of, you know, for instance, we had that at the University Napier in Edinburgh, who the midwives who were teaching these young students that biological males can give birth, and they were teaching them how to manage them clinically. And yeah, there was a bit of an outcry about it, but I presume they're still being allowed to do that and get away with the level of gaslighting. But they weren't stopped, and there was no professional accountability for the people who were teaching that. And also, you know, they're not a Russell Group university. I remember that most of the universities teaching the non certainly in the non medical degrees, they're not Russell Group, so they're not beholden to massive research funding. So they should be people should be jumping all over them and shouting at this absolute abomination that's taking place, because these people are accountable to their professional bodies. And, you know, the people need to be acting very strategically to target these professions, and standing up to tackle the gaslighting. We can no longer allow this to take place. We can't just be going a bottom up and picking up the pieces with the patients who are harmed. We need to be going much more structural at this, as we see it, even in the small amount of academics and clinicians we need to be supporting them, jumping behind them, and helping them to shut this down, challenging people like GLAD, lighting them up. You know, why are they working with mermaids? We need to be all over that at the moment, and being way less silent about it.
I think what happened at the university with the midwifery course, I think it's a really good example of people just trying to grapple with this situation. And I can imagine that trying to, you know, when you're presented with a nebulous idea, but then that nebulous idea is not just the mantra, trans men are men, trans women are women, but, you know, people do try to go a bit deeper into it and then go, okay, fine, sex can't be changed, you're just changing the body. I think it's, you know, you can see how someone who doesn't really have a lot of knowledge about these things can try to justify that sort of intervention, that sort of item on the curriculum by saying, oh, but some trans men who are in fact females will have phalloplasties, but they can still have the uteruses and they might need to give birth, but then they don't have a knowledge to understand that those neophalluses are nothing like real penises, but they can justify why someone who has something that looks like a penis might need catheterization. The fact that they're now teaching actual male catheterization, that's, you know, not going to help anyone on the floor. But you can see how people are desperately trying to make sense of this. And you see this in America as well. I've spoken to some OBGYNs there who are motivated by, you know, extra funds that will be paid by these men who've had reassignment surgeries and whatever, claim that actual males need pap smears. It turns out that in fact, males who had penile inversion to create neovagina might have to have some kind of smear, which is going to check for completely different cells from cervical cells, but that perhaps the intervention is quite similar. But you need to actually challenge them a lot to get to that point. What you get on the surface is that, no, absolutely, trans women are more than welcome, and they also need cervical smears like women. And then you get borderline, you know, confused trans women on social media claim that they have services too. So it's a big old mess. Because it doesn't make sense. Everyone who is trying to work from the position of science is trying to grapple with what is essentially a religious belief.
I do recognise that my opinions on this are somewhat stronger than some of my colleagues, and I probably have them because having been a course leader and, you know, run teams of people actually, you know, written the curriculum, done the quality aspects, trained the senior lecturers, I have a lot less tolerance for the level of, oh, you know, no, they're just acting under, you know, doing what they were told. We don't want to, you know, no, we don't want to cancel them, etc. you know, and I have got myself into a few wars over this, because I do think that actually they are accountable and they are responsible, and they don't have they should be standing up themselves and fighting back from within and saying, this is bullshit, this is absolute capture nonsense, and they should be taking, they are, you know, they're not kids, these are also highly qualified professionals. So, you know, that's kind of why I have quite a hard line on it. But anyway, look, let me just finish you off. Let me finish you off. What's the sort of been some of the toughest parts of this journey for you in terms of your virtual life in the gender wars?
I think male violence, which has mandated that I have to remain anonymous, has been very difficult, because I'm quite proud of what I've done and what I've achieved. I have had to miss a lot of opportunities because of having to safeguard my anonymity. And it is infuriating that in 20 years, that internet has been, you know, a part of all of our daily lives. The authorities have done nothing to address the issue of male violence, and it has spilt over into the real world now. I know women in our activism who had to move house, women who had to sue, who had to take restraining orders. It's a lot of stress, and because I have a chronic illness which gets exacerbated by stress, I get asthma, amongst other things. I just can't afford to live in a state of worry. And that, I think, for me, has been most difficult. And you see these high-handed trans activists belittle and dismiss any woman who is anonymous, and there are so many of us who are, for various reasons, either because we work or we have children, or we are, you know, we have obligations towards organizations that depend on funding, that would potentially be compromised if we are to be outed as TERFs or whatever. And it's just grim. I mean, obviously it makes sense why the situation is this way when you see the whole thing and realize that this is one massive misogynistic power grab by men against women, against women's rights. This is male sexual rights movement ultimately, but it doesn't make it any easier for us day to day, really. So I think that would have been the hardest. I think actually engaging with women, learning, researching, having the opportunity to formulate my thoughts and practice my own writing, and all that has been really good. But this constant threat of violence is hard.
The misogyny is just knows no bounds, doesn't it?
Yeah, and it's institutional. You see it with the police.
Yeah.
And it's, you know, normally where you would feel confident to call the cops and say, look, this person is harassing me or threatening me, and you'd be confident that CPS will, you know, prosecute or try to do something. You know, we're now at a stage where even rape and violent assault is not even being prosecuted anymore, whilst women are being harassed in their homes on Sunday and dragged out of their houses for tweeting a meme. You know, it's so bizarre that, you know, I think we're all trying very hard to hope this is not some kind of horrific authoritarianism, but you know, I'm quite worried personally.
Well, you know, thank you so much for sharing yourself with us all, and your love and your friendship and your thoughts and your wisdom, because, you know, you're a massive asset. You are a role model and a great friend to many of us in this gender war. And every day that we kind of, you know, log on and we do our activism in one way or another, online, offline, I have to say that you are an inspiration, and you've certainly made my life much more enjoyable, you know, having you as a friend and a mentor in this. So thank you, and thank you for agreeing to come and talk to us today. So you know, I hope it's been bearable for you.
It was wonderful. Thank you so much, and for your kind words and for this opportunity.
Yeah, you're welcome. Speak to you soon.
Speak to you soon. Bye.